Hello and welcome to this special meeting of the Paso Robles City Council for Thursday, November the 12th. Before we bring the meeting to order, I'm going to read the following statement. In compliance with the state and county shelter home orders and as allowed by the Governor's Executive Order N-29-20, which allows for a deviation of teleconference rules required by the Ralph M. Brown Act, City Council meetings will be held by teleconference only until further notice. Rather than attending in person, a resident should call 805-865-7276 to provide public comment via phone. That phone line will be open just prior to the start of the regular meeting, or in this case, the special meeting at 6:30 p.m. Written public documents can be submitted via email to cityclerk@prcity.com prior to 12 noon on the day of the council meeting to be posted as an addendum to the agenda. If submitting written comments in advance of the meeting, please note the agenda item by number or name. City Council meetings will be live streamed and available to play later on YouTube by accessing the following link, www.prcity.com/YouTube. And with that, I will call the meeting to order and ask for a roll call, please.
Councilmember Garcia.
Here.
Councilmember Gregory.
Here.
Councilmember Hammond.
Here.
Councilmember Strong.
Here.
Mayor Martin.
And I am here. And I would invite you now to mute your microphones with the exception of Councilman Strong, who I'd ask to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, I had trouble unmuting. And if you will join me, please. And I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And could we please have staff introductions? Who's online with us tonight?
Ty Lewis, your police chief, is here.
Jonathan Stornetta, fire chief.
Christopher Electrical, Public Works Director. I'm joined by Ditas Esperanza.
Brian Cornell, Administrative Services.
Julie Dolan, Community Services Director.
Sarah Johnson Rios, Assistant City Manager. Joined by Melissa Martin, City Clerk, Dave McHugh, IT Manager, Shauna Howenstein, Civic Engagement Coordinator, and Paul Sloan, Economic Development Manager.
Kimberly Hood, Interim City Attorney.
Tom Fritchie, City Manager.
Very good. Thank you all. A reminder to the public comment for special meetings is limited to agenda items only. This is a special meeting. An opportunity will be provided for each agenda item when that item is called. And we've already noted how to contact City Hall or to call in for your public comments. Once again, that phone number is 805-865-7276. We have a couple of items on the agenda tonight. We have a presentation, which is basically a thank you to the community. Also, we have discussion on the SAFER grant for a third fire engine and station. We're going to kind of roll those together, and I'll turn it over to the city manager to kick that off.
Thank you, Your Honor. The community, in fact, the nation at large, has gone through a very difficult 2020, and certainly our community has not in any way been unscathed by the pandemic, by the financial and economic problems, by fires, by active shooters. We've had a series of incidents, and it would have been very easy for this community to buckle under, and it has not. Paso Strong has been the byword of the community, and it has clearly been the strength and actions of the community that have demonstrated that strength. And the community was asked this past election day to dig a little deeper and fund essential city services. And in a time of obviously overall economic difficulties and difficulties for many, many, many of our families, the community, majority of the community said, yes, we believe those essential services are vital. We believe it's important to fund them, and we're willing to pay more in sales taxes in order to fund them. And I just think that it is a very impressive feat. This is a wonderful community that looks out for each other and looks out for the community as a whole. And it's very difficult to find adequate ways just to say thank you, because now we know going forward we will have additional resources to provide services we haven't been able to provide, and we knew we weren't meeting the needs of the community. So just a very sincere thank you to all the voters, whichever way they voted. The fact that people became informed and were engaged in the conversation leading up to the election and then made their choice. It's the democratic process, and I just really want to thank everyone for their involvement.
Yes, and a discussion about the steps ahead for J20's application is also on the agenda for tonight, but I agree. Our first order of business this evening is to recognize the community's perception of the true need for expanded resources to ensure police and fire, and to make sure they're adequately staffed and supplied, and to accelerate the repairs to our system of streets. And we all know that it's never agreeable to increase taxes, but our friends and neighbors have determined to do just that, to protect our quality of life and show once again that Paso Robles is a can-do city. They've also shown wisdom in the recognition that of the potential $10 million per year this measure will generate, a substantial portion will be paid by visitors to our community. So I just want to say that I and the entire City Council, and of course all of our city's first responders, say thank you for this vote of confidence in our future. You know, more than 25 years ago, I was involved in a process to build our current City Hall/library. And when we made that decision that night, I was approached by somebody who said, a decision to do this really says something about the commitment of our community. And the passage of J20 is just another positive reflection on the commitment of our community. And as always, there's more work to be done. The job's never finished. We are going to work to accomplish the goals set forth by J20. That means to work to strengthen public safety and street repairs, and work to demonstrate every day that taxpayer funds are spent accountably, transparently, and effectively. On July 21st, based on responses to city surveys, the City Council passed a resolution prioritizing fire and emergency services, police services, and street repairs and maintenance. The work to address those priorities begins anew tonight. We're going to be answering questions such as how will the citizen oversight process be accomplished to make sure that we are transparent and accountable? When will J20 funds actually be available? How will J20 funds be allocated, and what, if anything, should be done immediately with the expectation of those funds? And so it is with great gratitude and respect for the voters that we begin this work, and dedicated as always to the highest service in our community, fostering confidence in our process, and encouraging the greatest degree of public involvement. So on behalf of all of our people here at City Hall, our City Council, and everyone, regardless of which side of this issue we were on, thank you for your participation in our democracy, and thank you for helping make this decision for our community. We have great hopes that this is going to be something that really improves the way we are able to provide services here in Paso Robles. With that, let us move on now to our discussion items. Discussion item number 2 is acceptance of a second SAFER grant to enable a third fire station and engine. Mr. Stornetta?
Actually, Mr. Mayor, I'll go ahead and start this off. Mr. Stornetta will be participating as well. And item number 2 and 3 are all related to J20. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your statements to the community. And Dave, if you wouldn't mind putting the first slide up, please. Next slide, please. So clearly, there are several days until all votes have to be counted, and at that point, votes delivered later will not be counted. But given the few remaining outstanding votes, it seems fairly certain the J20 is likely to pass. And so in addition to thanking the voters, we want to base this presentation from this moment forward, assuming the passage of J20. Next slide, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council. This is Ryan Cornell, Director of Administrative Services. Just going to touch base on kind of 3 slides and kind of just lead the discussion on this voter-approved J20 supplemental sales tax. As you're aware, the city does currently have a 1/2 cent supplemental sales tax, and although the 1/2 cent and the most recently approved 1 cent is the same type of money, meaning they're both sales tax revenue generated from the same transaction, the intended uses of the 1 cent supplemental sales tax is going to be quite different. The current 1/2 cent supplemental sales tax is simple. It's for streets and roads. The money comes into the general fund, and the same amount of money gets earmarked for street and road repair and replacement. If the revenues come in less than anticipated, then we simply just repave or replace less street miles. But one of the biggest differences with the intention of the 1 cent supplemental sales tax is that we'll be using these funds for personnel-related costs, specifically more police officers, more firefighters, and more street maintenance personnel. Which kind of leads me to my next point. The current 1/2 cent supplemental sales tax only involves one department, specifically one division in that department, capital projects. But now we are involving police, emergency services, and public works. And in each one of these departments, there's ongoing and competing needs, both in the near term and in the long term, which require an ongoing funding source, and others just kind of one-time expenses. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's going to be a lot more of a balancing act with these new funds. We have to keep an eye on the long-term needs just to make sure that we're not overcommitting ourselves with our near-term needs. But likewise, we can't keep looking out and not do anything in the near term. We have to address the unmet needs of each of these 3 areas now. But at the same time, again, being this whole balancing act, we have to be mindful of our capacity. We need to make sure we aren't tying up resources that could otherwise address some other near-term items. As an example, right, there's no point of adding 20 police officer positions now when we can only recruit for 5 in a year. So kind of all of these different factors are kind of at play when we develop our spending plan for the supplemental sales tax money. We also need to be mindful of the 1/2 cent sales tax that's going to be dropping off in fiscal year 24-25. Will we ask Roblins to extend that supplemental sales tax too? Will it be rolled into the newly created 1 cent supplemental sales tax? We're just not sure. But if it does end up getting rolled into this 1%, then we need to make sure that our ongoing costs are limited in the early years so that we can absorb the revenue loss from the 1/2 cent supplemental sales tax when it drops off in 4 or 5 years. I guess ultimately I want to make sure the community understands that we're taking this additional tax very seriously. We want to spend it wisely and appropriately and focus on what this additional revenue can do. We can't do it all. There's still going to be discretion. There's still going to be curveballs in the spending plan. But I don't want to start running out of the gate when we still haven't tied our shoelaces. Rather, city staff with feedback from the community, specifically the Oversight Board, feedback from you, City Council, and to come back with a plan that is both fluid and methodical and how much and how and when we address each unmet need. Next slide, Dave. By way of this tax approval, the city's sales tax rate will now be 8.75% of all taxable goods and services, an increase from the current 7.75%. Now, if you recall from Paso talks, the city doesn't get all of the allocation that's taxed from sales tax. We actually get a very small piece. Now, granted, we do get the supplemental sales tax. We get both the 1/2 cent and this newly created 1 cent, as well as an additional 1% just from our normal allocation. So 2.5% out of the 8.75% tax rate will come to the city. The state maintains and retains the largest piece of the sales tax that's generated at 6%, and the county gets 1/4% of the sales tax. So the graph here is general fund revenue history and the 10-year forecast. The green bars represent the general fund non-sales tax general fund revenue. The non-supplemental sales tax generated revenue. So you can see from fiscal year 11-12 all the way up through fiscal year 18-19, we've had significant revenue growth, and then the pandemic hit, and so we're seeing a little bit of the decline in revenues. in fiscal year 19, 20, and 2021s. And then we really are projecting that this is going to bottom out in fiscal year 21, 22, and then start growing thereafter. The lighter green line above the darker green line is the half-cent supplemental sales tax. Again, that began in fiscal year 12-13, and we did receive just a fraction, a quarter's worth of revenue in that first year. But then, as you can see, it falls off in fiscal year 25-26 unless it's renewed by the voters, either in 2022 or 2024. And then lastly, the light blue bar is the new J20 1 cent sales tax. Again, like I said, we do get about a quarter's worth of revenue in this fiscal year. So even though we received May and June allotment in July and August, accounting standards does allow us to recognize that revenue in fiscal year 2021. But really, I show this graph for two reasons. The first being that the J20 supplemental sales tax is a significant increase into the city's general fund revenues, to the tune of about 25%, which kind of means that in 12 years, when the tax automatically ends, it'll be a significant decrease in revenues. But there's also another single source that could have been increased. But there isn't a single other tax that could have generated this much tax revenue. The second reason why I wanted to show you this graph was, and I've been saying this for a couple of years now, the current half cent, again, sunsets in 24-25, and unless renewed, it's going to go away. And again, I don't want to, commit to ongoing expenses if we don't have the ongoing revenues to go along with it. But at the end of the day, in fiscal year 2021, which is circled kind of there in red, we are going to anticipate about another $2.5 million worth of revenues this year that we hadn't anticipated. Next slide, Dave. And because we are getting additional revenues, we are recommending moving forward with some near-term needs. Now, the chiefs and the Public Works Director, Christopher Leckel, will get more into these in their slides. But there are a mix of one-time and ongoing costs. On the ongoing cost side of things, it's pretty much getting Fire Station 3 fully staffed and operational. We do have eligibility lists established for captain and engineer positions, so filling those ones specifically should be quite simple. And then kind of our past history shows that firefighters have been very easy to recruit for, and we're successful. So we think that getting the authorization to bring on the 3 additional fire captains to staff Fire Station 3 can happen between now and June 30th, and really now and in between when FEMA has put constraints on us as far as hiring for the SAFER grant. On the police side of things, however, recruiting for police officers has been quite difficult. And needless to say, this is going to be a challenge, not just now, but moving forward, especially since 5, 6 cities in our county also got increase in taxes approved as well, and expansion of their public safety forces is likely as well. For now, on police, we're really going to focus our efforts on the current vacant positions that are already authorized in the budget. These include 3 unfilled positions and 1 that's on a long-term and unpaid leave. So even though we're not necessarily asking for additional positions yet, we still plan on bringing more police officers on board sooner than later. And then lastly, recruitment for public works street maintenance specialists is currently underway. Because we're already doing this for the unfilled position, adding 2 additional positions to that recruitment is rather quite simple. So rather than hiring 1 person to fill the 1 vacant position, we'd be hiring 3. And then lastly, on the one-time cost column there's going to be a lot of one-time costs and needs, specifically the development of the Union Road property. That's the property that the city purchased last fiscal year for the eventual construction of Fire Station 3. But even that is kind of a balancing act too, because not only should the Fire Station 3 be paid by our residents and for tourism, which is how the supplemental sales tax money gets generated. But it should also be part of developers' contribution too. So we need to move forward with the design now. And then once we get that back, we can refine the cost of the station and really kind of figure out different sources of money and how each one are going to contribute. The Union Road property also anticipates that the site's going to contain a substation because we cannot add 6, 11, 20 more officers over the next 5 to 10 years and house them in our current station. Here's a list. There's a list of 3 other capital projects that are likely needed in the near term. This includes the data communications project. We've been working on that for the last couple of years and should be brought back to City Council's next meeting for approval of that contract. The police department's CAD RMS system needs to be replaced. It's kind of an estimated cost of $750,000. And then kind of also in the mix too is our expansion of street and roads. And we know with $5 million a year towards streets and roads that we're doing now is still not enough to increase our rating of our streets year over year. But really, these are just our initial thoughts, our kind of immediate needs. And again, the chiefs and Christopher Alecko will go into more detail, but just kind of wanted to show the community kind of immediate actions with this new money and show that it's going directly towards what we said it was going to be spent on. But at the same time, kind of understand and realize there's a lot more planning and prioritization needed just to make sure that we're using this money responsibly, wisely, and effectively. We just want to make sure that we're tying our shoelaces before we walk and before we go into a kind of a full sprint. And an important part of this whole planning and prioritization will be the oversight and advisory process, which is up next, and I'll turn it over to Tom to talk about that.
Thanks, Ryan. So it is very important that the community recognize that the trust they've placed in us was well placed, and that not only do we use the money for those high priority purposes they direct us to, but also that they have the ability to verify that that's exactly what is happening. And so just as we've had a Oversight and Advisory Committee for the half-cent sales tax that was passed in 2012, we need to develop and staff and follow through on a commitment for a oversight and advisory process for the J20 funds. We do have the panel we have. Do we continue with that panel and a new panel, or do we merge them? What kind of representation do we have of general community members, key institutions in the city? Do we expand the nature and scope of the responsibilities of the existing committee? Lots of questions that we need to think through and take community input on, and then make decisions. And we have recommendations for you in each of those areas later in this presentation. Next slide, please, Dave. Similarly, we have to decide how best to, as Ryan talked about, determine the highest priority needs, since these funds will be needed in a variety of areas within police, within fire, and within streets. So do we have a separate process for determining the needs and allocating the J20 funds, or do we have it be a differentiated component of the overall budget process next spring? Do we, as we've done with the N12 funds, do we do a 6-year plan, 5-year plan? Certainly there are reasons to do that, but or do we do it year by year? What is the level and nature and scope of community engagement? How do we continue the conversation that was developed over this past year with the surveys and polls we did and the community outreach we did to make sure the community continues to give us their input and their direction? And finally, we need to make sure that the community understands that these funds are not supplanting other funds we get, but these are additional services over and above what we would have provided with the existing funds that they already provide us. Next slide.
Next slide, please. Good evening, Mayor Martin, members of the council, Jonathan Stornetta, Fire Chief. The fire department currently has a number of immediate needs, and those needs are identified on the slide here that include enhancing staffing to meet national standards and federal regulations, increasing the number of engine companies to meet needed fire flow requirements, increasing response capabilities to meet current service level demands, and staffing a third fire station to decrease geographical travel distances and reduce response times. Next slide, please. In May, we submitted for another SAFER grant. These federal grants were created to provide funding directly to fire departments to enhance their abilities to comply with staffing, response, and operational standards established by NFPA 1710. NFPA 1710 establishes the minimum requirements for resource deployment and fire suppression. Included in these requirements are the number of firefighters needed per fire engine and the number of firefighters needed at the scene of a structure fire. NFPA recommends a minimum of 4 personnel per fire engine and 15 firefighters for low hazard structure fires. And just to give you an idea, our structure fire just the other day, we had 32 firefighters there. Even with the addition of these 3 SAFER positions, we do not meet NFPA staffing requirements, but it does get us one step closer to achieving that goal. In September, we learned that we were successful in our grant request, and the city was awarded just over $1 million to hire 3 firefighter paramedics. This grant covers 100% of salary and benefits for 3 years. This grant is different, although, from our previous SAFER grant, in that there is no cost share requirement. The parameters of accepting the grant do include opening a 3rd fire station and staffing a 3rd fire engine. The addition of a 3rd fire station and engine enhances the department's ability to meet some of the deficiencies that were recently noted in our ISO assessment. Next slide, please. The City Council established a goal of responding to all emergencies in 4 minutes or less 90% of the time. Currently, we are only able to meet this goal 56% of the time. As you see on the graph here, our response times in the 90th percentile are 7 minutes and 49 seconds, over 3.5 minutes longer than our established goal. The 3 largest contributors to our inability to meet response times is geographical travel distances, number of fire stations, and simultaneous calls. Next slide, please. The picture on the left here illustrates our 4-minute response zones for Fire Station 1 and Fire Station 2. Fire Station 1 is in blue and Fire Station 2 is in yellow. The green shaded box indicates those areas that are currently underserved and outside of our 4-minute response zone. The picture on the right illustrates the 4-minute response zone if Fire Station 3 is added. Adding a 3rd fire station fills this void. Additionally, NFPA's national average department profile for communities the size of Paso Robles recommend we have between 3 and 5 fire stations. This number is also consistent with the deployment analysis used in the ISO's fire suppression rating schedule. Next slide, please. On this slide, the red line at the bottom shows our current staffing level of 27 firefighters. The yellow line indicates recommended staffing levels for a population of 32,000 from the International Association of City Managers, which is recommended we have 49 firefighters. And lastly, the green line is the recommendation from the National Fire Protection Agency for a population of 32,000, which is 58 firefighters. The addition of the 3 SAFER positions will increase our firefighter staffing levels to 30, which is still significantly below the national standards and recommendations. Next slide, please. Based on historical data, we anticipate a 3.8% increase in call volume each year for the next 10 years. These projections do not include any future development or population increases. Development and population growth will significantly impact emergency services. The column on the far right that's outlined in yellow accounts for the impacts of the projects currently in the city's project pipeline. We estimate our annual call volume to increase 41% once these pipeline projects are complete. Next slide, please. To keep pace with current and future service demands, we created this table to identify our needs over the course of the next 10 years. The city's safety element and growth management plan identifies minimum staffing as 0.8 to 1.3 firefighters per 1,000 residents. Our current staffing ratio is 0.84. To ensure we completed an effective, logical, and fiscally responsible staffing model, we also conducted an in-depth analysis on actual staff workload and unit hour utilization. Unit hour utilization is a performance standard that measures the amount of time an emergency response vehicle is not available for response since it is already committed to another incident. Once all this data was compiled, we determined that our staffing need is 1 firefighter per 1,000 population. The table before you reflects the new staffing ratio, and this ratio has already been incorporated into current development financial impact reports. I will not go through the whole chart, but I want to point out a few key points. We have a need for additional staff and administration to keep pace with development, state-mandated inspections, disaster preparedness, and wildfire mitigation efforts. In the 2022 column, we would like to implement a seasonal firefighter program. The benefits of this program provide us the ability to attract, identify, and train a diverse group of local promising candidates for potential future employment. The seasonal program allows us to augment staffing during the height of fire season. Atascadero Fire Department has utilized this model for over 35 years and has proven to be very successful in future hiring and augmenting staffing during fire season. In 2024, we are recommending hiring an additional 6 firefighters to put the squad back into service. Once we move to an engine company, if you approve it for Fire Station 3, we still only have 3 response resources. And this year alone, in the first 10 months, there were 46 total hours. We had no resources available to respond to additional calls. So by putting the squad back into service allows us to decrease these amount of times that we are unavailable and unable to respond. The total cost to implement our staffing needs over the next 10 years is approximately $3.6 million. Lastly, as the community continues to develop and expand, we will be evaluating the need for a 4th fire station in 2030. We continue today to have the 2 busiest fire stations in the county, and our projected data indicates we will be the busiest fire department in San Luis Obispo County once the current projects in our city project pipelines are complete. Next slide, please. This slide identifies the fiscal impacts associated with the SAFER grant, opening a temporary Fire Station 3, and purchasing an additional fire engine. The ongoing costs you see for the 3 fire captains will be the full amount after the SAFER grant expires. The estimated costs of a temporary and final fire station are preliminary and has not been fully itemized. By way of this action, city staff will move forward with design of Fire Station 3 and return to City Council with more accurate cost estimates. Next slide.
All right, so I wanted to thank the community, as did everybody else, for the support through this whole process and J20. It really means a lot to the police department and public safety and roads in general. Tonight, I wanted to reach out to council. I know that the SAFER grant is up for consideration, as well as the streets departments are also looking for expansion. Tonight, I'm refraining from asking for any additional police officers preliminarily, because as we learned through this process of educating the community and the council, that public involvement is expected as part of our transparency and growth opportunity. As the council may be aware, we have already in place a current public safety element that's part of our general plan, which requests, or actually which establishes a ratio of 1.4 to 1.6 police officers per 1,000 residents. If the council were to adopt that or reaffirm their commitment to that staffing element, we would be in line to receive approximately 41 to 51 officers, or an increase of approximately authorized positions at this time of 6 to 11 new police officers. Now, I will diverge a little bit from Mr. Cornell's comments that we have competing interests. I believe that the public safety and roads have complementary interests in protecting the community, and establishing allocation for each of them becomes very important. While over the last several years, the fire department has received millions of dollars in additional funding, and the streets has benefited from the street tax of nearly $5 million a year, the police department hasn't received any additional funding to expand its police department to ever come close to the 1.4 to 1.6 officer per 1,000 ratio that the city councils, this current city council and previous councils have adopted. As you know, I did a 2018 staffing analysis that I brought to the council for review. Based upon our needs at the time, the police department needed between 52 and 59 police officers just to be able to keep up with our work by 2018 standards. 52 was the minimum to achieve operational efficiency. As Mr. Cornell pointed out, we're never able to remain at full staffing because retaining and recruiting police officers, especially experienced police officers, has been a challenge, not only for our police department, but for others. To put that in perspective, we've done some unofficial requests from other departments and police officers associations to determine how many police officers that don't work for the police department live within the city of Paso Robles. By our estimates, over 50 police officers that work for neighboring agencies live and reside, shop, and take care of their business here in Paso Robles, but don't currently work for us. So we have a great pool to be able to potentially recruit from should the city council start committing to growing the organization and achieving that 1.4 to 1.6 officer ratio. According to my 2018 analysis, our ratio should be closer to 1.85. But I also understand that, as was pointed out, that our budget might not be able to sustain that much, nor am I suggesting that the police department receive the full allocation of resources that J20 requires. However, at some point, the police department should continue to grow to meet the challenges and the needs of the department. Next slide. Possible initiatives for the police department. I was able to meet with several council members, community members, and of course our city manager to discuss the needs of the department. In order for us to grow, we're going to need to grow at all levels of the organization. Particular areas of interest became apparent through those conversations. The community and the city council and other members had interest in bringing back our housing authority police officer. We, at one point in the mid-2000s, we had an officer that was embedded into the Oak Park area. We had an office established, and that officer became part of the Oak Park community, built relations, and was able to work with marginalized aspects of our community and at-risk youth. At one point, the city council also instructed the police department to form a special enforcement team that dealt with drugs, gangs, and even had a member on the the county task force. Of course, during the mid-2000s, when the economy went into a downturn, the special enforcement team soon vanished because we had to keep boots on the ground in the patrol aspects. Number one complaint throughout the city is often traffic safety. Currently, we have one full-time motor officer with another one that's soon to transfer out in January just to be able to keep our patrol staff functioning at full allocation. Our detective bureau, we have 2 detectives to serve a community of 32,000. As the council is aware, we've had several homicides, crimes against persons, shootings, robberies, and violent crime. And we have 2 detectives that are assigned full-time to investigate all of those, which takes up most of their time. Lastly, the community and council expressed interest in downtown patrols and around our parks. Bike patrols were something that was brought up several times. Having more visibility to be able to interact with our business owners and our visitors in the downtown area and bring a sense of security and be able to deal with quality of life issues. Next slide. This is a breakdown of how I would plan to build out the police department over the next 3 years. Yes, it's ambitious, and yes, it would be a tall order. I don't necessarily agree with the notion that if the city council were to tell us that we could hire 20 police officers today, that would be a problem I would love to try and solve. However, I know that's not realistic, but I do think a realistic number would be 7 police officers per year. That would be a mix of police officers that are potentially lateral applicants, as well as those that we would put through the police academy. And as I said, those positions would need to grow from top to bottom. For every 4 officers or so, we would need a supervisor position. So as you can see here, we would also need the support services staff to be able to support the work that all these new police officers would be creating for the district attorney's office, for the courts, and for the various agencies that we interact with. The staffing model is built out there through 2023. Which shows that if we were to receive funding to meet the numbers of the 2018 staffing analysis, That would bring us to a number of 57 police officers, realizing that we're always in a constant state of recruitment and retention, and that we've never achieved full staffing, at least since I've worked here at the police department, which has been since 2002. Next slide. With that, I'll turn it over to Christopher to talk about streets and maintenance.
Thanks, Ty. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council. Christopher Luckel, Interim Public Works Director. Next slide, please. The city's pavement management system utilizes an analytical computer model that aids in evaluating post-construction pavement condition, timing of preventative maintenance, rehabilitation treatments, and economic assessments of alternatives. The objective is to improve the quality and performance of pavements while minimizing life cycle costs through good management practices. The pavement is grading using a pavement condition index called the CP or PCI that has a scale of 0 to 100. As an example, a 0 would be an unimproved road, unimproved dirt road. A PCI of 100 would be pavement condition immediately after a road is constructed to rigorous standards. It is common for a city to strive to maintain an overall PCI above 70. So for example, a city might seek to maintain arterials and collectors at a PCI of 80, 70 for residential streets, and say 65 for alleys. The reason for this is that for PCIs above 70, only light maintenance treatments are typically needed to maintain the pavement. However, as is often the case, funding requirements for such a strategy often exceed what is available. The cost to maintain pavement condition can be reduced through implementation of a cohesive ongoing maintenance program. The red line on the graph to the right shows how pavement will degrade over time without maintenance. The green line illustrates how the life of pavement can greatly benefit by performing routine maintenance and minor rehabs. Routine maintenance maintains good pavement condition and extends the time and expense between major road reconstruction. Next slide, please. In 2016, the city's PCI was projected to fall from 54 to below 45 by the year 2020 if no additional maintenance was performed. That's shown on the red curve. In order to maintain the city's PCI, it was estimated that $10 million a year would need to be spent on roads, and that's the yellow curve. With approximately $5 million a year of funding made available by the passage of the 2012 supplemental sales tax, the city implemented its pavement management system, the orange curve, and utilizing this system, the city was able to maintain an overall PCI of 52. Next slide, please. The city currently has 5 budgeted street maintenance positions, including 1 existing vacancy. The city's full-time staff are unable to keep up with the maintenance requirements of 350 lane miles of road. Current staffing is insufficient to perform heavy maintenance within the roadway, like paving and full-depth hotspot repairs. These operations require at least 6 staff members. 2 additional staff would increase production significantly and allow the department to better meet the heavy demand for routine activities like crack sealing, pothole, and sidewalk repairs. Next slide, please. So in summary, preventative maintenance dramatically slows pavement deterioration, increases the overall value and condition of the road system, extends the time between major reconstruction, and frees funds to reconstruct existing streets that are heavily degraded. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Christopher. Next slide, please. So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we have a series of recommendations for you tonight, and they're fairly complex, so I've repeated them here in the slides. They do appear in your staff reports. First, with respect to the SAFER grant and emergency services, we are asking you tonight to approve a resolution that authorizes us to notify the federal government that we are accepting the SAFER grant as discussed by Jonathan. And to do that, we would be adding 3 positions, fire captain positions, to our authorized listing in the budget. So we need to amend the budget, and the resolution would do that. In addition, it would appropriate the necessary funds. And as Mr. Cornell indicated, we are being reimbursed for 100% of the salaries and benefits. Now, there are some equipment costs we have to pay, but those are significantly less than the personnel costs. And so the budget would also be amended to receive those revenues from the federal government as well as expend those funds. And then finally, staff, HR staff would be working with the department to do the recruitment, do the interviews, and ensure we have high quality personnel being brought on board and trained. Next slide, please. On the police side, as the chief indicated, we would love to be able to fill the vacant positions and add positions. At this point, the chief is recommending that we continue on a continuous basis the current open recruitments to seek to fill the existing vacant positions, and he will be returning to the council for the increase in positions as part of the budget process next spring. And as that would include both police officers as well as dispatchers and other high priority positions in the department. Next slide, please. On streets, we're asking you to approve a resolution that amends the authorized position listing to add the 2 maintenance specialists, 1-2 positions to the streets division and appropriate the funds necessary to pay for that work. Now, in both the cases of fire and streets, we're asking you to take these actions even before the funds start being collected. As the council is aware, the J20 tax does not go into effect until April 1st, and we won't receive revenues from the state, as Mr. Cornell said, until probably June or even July. But because of the need to do things such as crack sealing before the winter season, crack sealing is most effective if done before the rainy season so that the water does not get in the cracks. And in order to meet the demands of the federal government for the SAFER grant, we do need to initiate those processes now. And so we would be spending funds from the general fund and repaying that general fund from the J20 revenues when they are received. It is very important that we start taking these actions now because the needs are now. The longer we wait to take some of these actions, the longer we're putting off fulfillment of the needs that the community has asked us to meet. Next slide, please. Then in addition, we would like to make recommendations to you about the oversight and advisory process. We do have, as we talked about earlier, the current committee for the N12 funds. We'd like to transition from that current committee to a new committee that would oversee both the N12 and the J20 funds. We don't believe it makes any sense to have 2 parallel committees because they might come up with different priorities, for example, for streets work. We would, however, recommend that we have members of the current committee who've served very well, the chair being a notable example, and we'd like to provide them the opportunity to continue their service if they so choose on the combined committee. We would also like to expand the membership, allocating some of the new positions to key institutions within the city, and then also advertise for general community members who would be selected by the council. And then we would expand the committee's role in both oversight and advice areas. And we would do that by bringing back to the council as soon as possible an amended charter and bylaws for the new committee, taking the charter and bylaws for the existing committee and modifying it as appropriate based on what we've been hearing from the community and the direction from you. Next slide, please. And finally, in terms of the budget process, we would like to have an enhanced budget process starting in January that benefits from greatly additional participation by the community that was started over the past year through the conversation and the surveys and polls that we conducted, and all of the feedback we've been getting through this election season. And that budget process would handle all of the regular funds as well as both the N12 and the J20 funds that Ryan would indicate would be forecasted for the coming year. The priorities, as the mayor indicated at the beginning of the meeting, have already been set by the council, and those give us the guidelines for the use of those funds. And we would do the process in such a way that, as the mayor indicated, it's transparent and accountable to ensure that the community can see how the funds are being spent, and they're being spent on the high priority areas. And then finally, even though the current committee has been tasked with ensuring the community is aware of how the funds from N12 have been spent, we have not done a good job as a city. This is no criticism of the committee, but we have not done a good job of the city of communicating that to the public. So we would request that you direct us to establish a process for ongoing communication with the public on how the funds are being budgeted and how the funds are being expended, so that the community, in essence, assists the committee in its role of both providing oversight as well as providing advice to the council. And then thinking back over the presentation tonight, I want to make sure there wasn't any misunderstanding. So for instance, when Chief Stornett indicated that we currently have 27 firefighters, what that amounts to is on any given day, we have 2 engine companies of 3 people each. We have the 2-person paramedic squad, and we have a battalion chief. But the battalion chief has the dual role of administering the shift as well as participating in significant events. So at any given point in time, we have only 9 individuals serving the entire community, both for fire suppression needs as well as EMS needs. And the science of responding to EMS needs has become much more sophisticated and much more successful. And so frequently on a stroke or a heart attack or some other major urgent care situation, we can have 4 or 5 people working on the person to save his or her life. And our department is incredibly successful. So on any given day, even though we have only 8 people in apparatus and the 9th person to BC, we can be both responding to fires as well as saving people's lives, having medical emergencies. And then secondly, I don't want people to go away thinking that the J20 funds are going to handle the needs for new development. No, the council's policy, and which is being carried out, is new development has to pay for itself. Existing residences, existing businesses are not paying to provide services to the new development. So as Mr. Cornell indicated, we did an economic impact analysis for both, for example, the Olson South Chandler development as well as the Beechwood development. And those developments will be paying for the firefighters, police officers, and street maintenance work that serves those developments. It is not the existing residents that will be paying for that. So with that, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, that is the presentation that augments the staff reports, the 2 staff reports you received both on the SAFER grant and on J20 in general. And these last 5 slides have presented our recommendations to you this evening. We are available for any and all questions.
Very good, thank you. And since we've rolled these conversations, these 2 items together, because they're both linked to J20, we plan to take public comment on both items at the same time. When it comes back to the council, we'll be talking about 2 different resolutions, so that's going to take a couple of motions. So with that, for those of you who may be tuned in or attending a city council meeting for the first time, our process goes like this now. The city council has the opportunity to ask questions of staff to clarify the issue. After that, we will open it to the public for comment. After public comment, we bring it back to the council for in-depth discussion and action as the council deems necessary. Tonight, our council questions will start with Councilman Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I've got bunches of it, but I guess I'll start off with Chief Lewis in the beginning. Ty, as this progresses and you're going to be filling positions that we need, you made a comment about 7 officers per year. And over 3 years, then that would add roughly 20, 21 folks. And that's essentially what you're saying we currently need or would need at that point in time.
Mr. Hammond, so remember, there's 2 different ways of looking at this. My staffing analysis basically says that we do need to add 20 police officers, which would take us up to approximately 59 police officers. I know that probably isn't a likely scenario just with J20 funds alone. So we're going to have to, that's the reason why I'm holding off tonight asking for additional bodies, because I think it's important that the community and the council weigh in on where they want it, what types of services they want to see their police department offer. We're largely pretty much exclusively reactive right now. We don't have any proactive policing to speak of. So getting us between that up to that 1.6 mark that's already in the safety element, I feel would be a good compromise to start, because that would ensure that we're not trying to take up all the J20 funds, because as we know, we're approving a safer grant likely tonight. Streets is also requesting additional money. So it's not a realistic expectation to grow our police department to 59 police officers. I did include those numbers in there just to show you what it would take to get there. It would take approximately 7 per year, which we can tailor based upon budget allocations as appropriated by the council for this process.
Right, and that's kind of where I was going. I know that the funding is going to take a while before we actually see dollars in the kitty, so to speak, where we can actually spend it toward personnel. But what I'm wondering too, again, is there's going to be a buffer time, to ramp up to the point where, like in the first year, 2 year, whatever, that we're going to maybe have some additional monies other than police and fire that we might, again, in my opinion, try to look on the west side with regard to streets improvement. The west side has clearly been pushed back because, again, a lot of the pavement and condition indexes are to the point where it's really telling us, it's a completely makeover, complete redo. Although I don't really think, in my opinion, that we have to go there. And I want to meet with Christopher on this a little bit to discuss it, because what I'm looking for is to try to reallocate some more funds on the west side, not so much for a complete makeover, but just general maintenance and cleaning up of our streets. I think that would be huge. And while we're ramping up with the safety side, we might have some extra monies that we could devote to getting the west side done more often, more sooner than what was planned. I know we have it on schedule. Everybody asks me, when's my street being done over here on the west side? And, we have what I call cobble pebble almost everywhere that you see. And it's getting pretty bad to the point where, it really is going to be too far gone. But on the other hand, I think many of our Roblins, if we would just do something with a heavy slurry and that sort of, what I'm getting at is if we can find part of these monies to devote to west side street maintenance in the interim until we get more into personnel for safety, that is something I want to explore a little bit. And I'm not sure what the rest of the council feels like, but again, there's a lot of places to put these funds, and I'm glad we have them to deal with now. But I'm speaking up basically for the west side streets at this point. So as far as fire, I sure don't want to see that squad go away. I really think, Jonathan, that is a critical piece of equipment to extend our reach to multiple medical aids that are happening. Clearly, it can't pump and squirt wet stuff on the red stuff, but on the other hand, we have the majority of our calls up there in the 80 percentile of medical aids that I think is critical that we keep this going, and somehow that I'm worried about, you're still planning, it sounds like 3-man engine company on our equipment. And I think that's good. I don't want to see fourth person really personally, because we don't have that many times where we have to have 4 people on an incident. And I'm talking about medical aids now. But, the other side is too, that most people need to understand, is to get our ISO up and having a third engine to the point where we can pump more water as a key element in that grading score for the city. And I'm glad we're going to be looking at that and budgeting for it, because it's something I think is very, very important, along with, of course, third station. So I'd like to see, again, in the next year or so, months anyway, that we are going to be planning how we're going to want to achieve goals with like a third station and a third engine, and how we can really make this money extend as far as it can, as quick as it can. It's improved as far as the city. Mr. Mayor, I think that's all I have currently. There's many, many questions, but I think at this point I'll listen, and then we can make final comments, I think, at the end.
Thank you. Questions for staff? Councilman Strong.
Yes, thank you. And I'm going to try to keep it to questions and not comments. I'll reserve my comment time until later. But I do have some questions. One of my first ones is on the 2 maintenance specialists. Are those 2 specialists to work primarily on streets and roads, and or the equipment or things to maintain or repair them?
Yes, Fred, those Councilman Strong, those 2 positions are going to be dedicated entirely to street maintenance. So they'll be doing things. Yeah.
Okay, that to me is very important, and I can explain why later. The other thing is, I'm thinking of these one-time expenditures that we're talking about. I don't think there are any one-time expenditures, aren't there? Don't all of them have to eventually be replaced? So don't we need graduated replacement costs into our budget as well? And the one time doesn't mean that they're going to last forever.
Yes, Councilmember Strong, you are right. A lot of the one-time costs, there is a component or replacement funding component to it. It is interesting though, and that's kind of one thing we need to figure out as we develop our spending plan. Are we going to utilize or take J20 funds and put them aside and for the eventual replacement of, say, a fire engine? So that's kind of more to come. We are definitely aware of the replacement component of all costs. It's even the data 911 radio project. We know after we replace the system, we're going to need to have some sort of ongoing funding set aside, so that when 15, 20 years down the road, we can we have enough money set aside to replace that system.
Well, and if you're going to get into technology as well, isn't it true that technology is advancing so rapidly that we have to consider utter total replacement with technology that is much more efficient and effective?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Then this might be from Melissa, and that is what we're proposing for these oversight groups. It sounds like we're getting them almost into the budgeting process. If they start dealing with recommendations on funding, doesn't that all of a sudden make them give them requirements under the state law for like 700 forms and other things to be filed with the state on their own finances that are made public, if they're going to be involved in the budgeting process at all?
This is Kimberly. I think you're referring to the. That's okay. The code filing requirements, and so we go through the code. We just finished up the biannual review of those positions, and so there's only certain ones that are required under the statute. There's the statutory filers, such as yourself and the city attorney, some examples. But for those other positions, we evaluate them to determine if they are required to file Form 700. I cannot recall off the top of my head if the current committee members are required to file a Form 700. If they're solely advisory, then they may not need to file a Form 700. So a lot of it depends on if it's just advisory in nature, which which is my understanding that this committee will just be advisory in nature.
So we have to be very careful that the public, as well as ourselves and how we function, makes that very clear that they do not have any decision-making capability. Correct?
Correct. And that's something we'd want to, with review and update of the charter and bylaws, that would be addressed in there.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question I have is, both the J20 funds and the N12 funds are part of our general fund, correct?
Councilmember Strong, yes, both are general taxes for general purposes. And so for CAFR reporting purposes, they will be funneled through the general fund. Now we do have the capabilities of accounting for those and segregating those costs separately, so we know what specific costs are being utilized by those monies. But yes, for all intents and purposes, they are part of the general fund.
But we can't really separate them out like we do enterprise funds.
Correct.
Okay, so as we create these committees and as we create these functions, don't we have to be very careful that we aren't creating an enterprise situation in the process?
I don't see that as a concern. I think, again, the way we have the accounting set up, or the way we're intending on having the accounting set up, where it's still part of the general fund, we'll be able to still kind of meet the needs of the community and pinpoint what exactly where these funds are being spent and how they're being spent.
So, Mr. Strong, the way to think about it is, because the revenues from J20 and N12, when they're received, go into the general fund, we can't track the individual dollars. But what we can say is, and let's take N12 because it's the easiest to conceptualize, that at least as many dollars as the city's receiving from N12 revenues are being spent on street maintenance and street repair. So we don't know which dollars is, whether it's coming from TOT or property tax or whatever else, but we know that the level of dollars being spent on street repair is at this, it equals or exceeds the amount of N12 revenues we receive. And that way we're fully in conformance with the law, and we're fully in conformance with the commitment we made to the community.
Okay, so therefore we cannot just separately budget these funds as such.
No, sir.
Okay, and I was asking that because I think we had a letter of comment that indicated that the community or members of the community wanted to see us segregate them to that extent, and that would almost make this illegal, and I believe.
That would be, if we had a special tax, that's exactly what we would do, but this is a general tax.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Councilwoman Garcia.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I just had a question on the, the public. I know this is very confusing, and, I've been reading my emails on the public input, and what Mr. Strong was saying just now, it's going to be hard, to separate funds coming in. But I know that the public really wants, public safety, and we're going to try to do all this together. But so we already know how much money, like Mr. Ryan was saying, we use for streets now. So my question is, it's going to be really hard to show the public, how much money we're spending. I mean, how much money we're using for each category. Is that correct?
No, I don't think it'd be that difficult. Let's use the example of the current committee that's providing oversight and advice on the N12 funds. Every reporting period, Ryan and his staff develop reports that demonstrate exactly how much in revenue the city received to date and through a given period from the N12 funds, and the long-term spending patterns on street repair and street maintenance. And it demonstrates that maybe in a given quarter, the numbers differ because we don't have, the same scale of street projects every quarter. Like winter quarter, we don't do as much in terms of major street repair given the weather. But it demonstrates each year and in total, we're spending at least as much as we've received from N12 funds. And so we would do the same thing with the J20 funds, showing that based on council priorities, as we heard loud and clear from the community, that the N20 revenues would be exceeded by the additional expenditures. And that's the point about not supplanting, by the additional expenditures on fire, police, and streets.
Okay. All right. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions here. First of all, let me beat the dead horse. Hello?
This is Steve Gregory. Are you going to give me a chance to talk?
No, I wasn't. I was going to skip right by you, Steve.
May I go ahead?
Please, go ahead.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Tom, can you just spend a couple of minutes explaining how the half-cent supplemental sales tax works so that the community and the rest of the council understands what's presented to them and how they advise us?
Sure, be glad to. So the Christopher's staff and Ryan's staff both prepare reports for the existing Oversight and Advisory Committee. And in addition, the council augmented the role of that committee, and I'll get to that in a minute. And so the original purpose of that committee was to report to the council and report to the community as to how the N12 funds were being spent, to demonstrate to the community that the commitments that the city had made as to how those funds would be spent was in fact being made. Because, for example, if the city did not meet those commitments and said we're going to spend those funds as we see fit, we don't care what commitments were made, the voters absolutely have the right to then go back in an upcoming general election and end the tax measure. That's totally within the voters' right. And so not only because we would not want that to happen, but because we want to meet our commitments and live up to our word and recognize and show how we value the trust being placed in us, the reports that go to the committee identify the revenues that come in and the expenditures made. And on an ongoing basis, we have demonstrated time and time again that the city, in fact, is even spending more money on roads than the N12 funds have generated, and clearly the need is there, and so that's why the council priorities have been such. So the committee is considered to be independent, even though the members are appointed by the council. They ask staff for information. It's not filtered. It's not dictated by the council. They ask staff for information. They make their own judgments, and they report to the council and the community on the use of those funds. And as we've said before, the committee has demonstrated the funds have in fact been spent as directed. In fact, that's part of why we've been having trouble getting a quorum for committee meetings, because it gets pretty boring every quarter, every 6 months, to say, yes, the city's done exactly what it said. In fact, it's done more than it said. There haven't been issues. Now, in addition, about 2 years ago, the council asked the committee to expand its role as Councilmember Hanman was starting to discuss, as to how the funds, what should be the priority of uses in terms of roads. And although Christopher didn't include it in his presentation tonight, he and Ditas have already started looking at additional treatments that might make sense on the west side, where we have so many roads that, because they are so old, wouldn't otherwise necessarily receive a treatment. So that process is underway. We couldn't finish that for tonight. And so Christopher tonight focused on the two positions needed immediately for crack sealing and other immediate maintenance needs. But we will be coming back to the council in the budget process with those additional treatments and an amendment to the 6-year plan based on those treatments if the council adopts any of those changes. So we've we've heard loud and clear from members of the council that they want us to look at options and bring back those options, and we'll do that as soon as they're ready as part of the budget process. So I hope, Mr. Councilmember Gregory, that answered your question about the committee.
So to take that a step further, I'll put this in the form of a question. So who prepares all the information for the current half-cent supplemental sales tax committee?
So Christopher Andidis and staff of Public Works prepare the reports that indicate what streets have been maintained and repaired and what the plan is going forward. One of the things that we did 5 years ago was work ahead. We didn't want to have streets continue to deteriorate, so we worked ahead and knowing that the half-cent revenues would come in. And so that's part of the 6-year plan, is to get the streets repaired as quickly as possible. And then Ryan, Catherine Piatti, and their staff do the financial side of the report. So the committee's really getting 2 reports that indicate both what work has been done and is going to be done, and secondly, how much in revenues have been received and how much has been spent.
So when our staff presents that to the committee, then the committee reviews what they present, and don't they, at that point in time, they could advise any changes or changes of possible direction as far as when, not how, but when to spend the money?
Correct. And as I say, I don't think we as a city, not the committee's fault, I don't think we as a city have done a good job of communicating both to the council and to the community as a whole.
And then to take that question a step further so that the council understands this. So we would have 3 different sets of experts providing budgeted information of potential concepts to use the funding so that the committee can review all 3 of those departments' spendings.
That is correct.
So their decision is purely advisory in that they're reviewing what the experts, being Ty Lewis and his staff, Chief Starnetta and his staff, would be deemed the first steps, of course, with the city manager and assistant city manager's input to follow forward, correct?
Correct. And they would be comparing reality against the plan and direction that the staff have been given by the council. So,
yeah. And I didn't mean to leave out Christopher Leckel also. So.
Correct. Yes,
okay. Sir. So I just wanted to ask those questions so everybody understands how this funding has been presented and how it's been acted upon and discussed by the committee. So with that, I'd like to go to emergency services questions with Chief Starnetta first, if I may. And Chief Starnetta, I don't know if you could answer this question or it might be a Ryan question. So if you could put up the slide with your annual spending for several years. Sorry, who's got it?
One more back, Dave, I think. There you go.
So, and this is more of a financial question. So, so as we get along, as the specific plans develop while we're going through the use of these funds, at what point do the CFD funds start coming back in? Because I just did some quick math. You know, on an annual basis with 2,000 homes, we're probably going to be receiving between 1.8 and $2.1 million that I understand are for community facilities district funding, which would supply money to both the police and fire departments. So from a public point of view and for total transparency, Tom, how do we integrate the income from those funds into the use of paying for some of the costs as we ramp up J20 funds?
So those funds received from the CFDs, the community financing districts, are accounted for separately by Ryan. So we actually keep a separate set of accounts for those. And those are accounts in terms of Excel spreadsheets, not bank accounts. So there's no misunderstanding. And in addition, the annual audit performed by an outside accounting firm is designed to confirm that our record keeping was appropriate and funds were used appropriately. So there would be an accounting of what the cost of the services were to the CFDs and the revenues generated. So it's a very similar process that the committee would use for J20 funds to ensure that development was paying for itself.
But those funds from the development could go to help offset the cumulative cost of the staffing.
Right. So, for example, when Chief Lewis talked about the number of officers he needs, in order to not be even more complex tonight, he did not distinguish between officers in terms those needed by existing parts of the community and the officers that would be needed by new development. So, but we would be doing that as that new development gets built.
And then this is kind of an overall question about the police and fire departments. Would it, and this is just a question, are we going to approach this on an individual department basis so that it's a little more digestible for the public and the council and the committee to digest the expenses being presented?
So yes, as in prior budget years, each department will propose its recommended budget for the year. But just as in typical general funds, the council decides how to allocate them between and among the various services the city provides. The council would be doing the same for the J20 funds. To what extent would they go to police? To what extent would they go to fire? And to what extent would they go to streets? So it's totally within the council's decision-making authority how to allocate those funds. And the council has already, by passing the resolution last July 21st, identified the overall priorities for those funds.
Okay, and then I have specific questions about each department, but I think I'll hold off on my questions at this point. I just wanted to ask those questions on how this will work as a whole, and then I'll reserve my comments for later. Thank you.
Thank you, and apologies to you, Steve, for skipping past you. It was unintentional. Appreciate your questions. I have just a couple. I don't think we can touch on this subject too often when it comes to the question of transparency and accountability, because there's obviously a level of mistrust of government out there, and I think we need to keep beating this horse dead or alive. When it comes to sales tax collected under J20, we will know to the penny, quarter by quarter, how much sales tax is generated. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And then when it comes to spending that sales tax through the budgetary process, which is predicated upon public input, whether you're a member of an oversight committee or not, you don't have to be a member of an oversight committee to be a part of the budget process. We have numerous public hearings and staff reports and any number of opportunities to affect that process. The expenditures are also known to the penny. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So we are able to take the total amount collected under J20 and compare it with the total amount expended in those budget categories, and then draw a conclusion as to whether or not a like amount or greater amount of money has been spent on those categories than is collected by the sales tax, correct?
Yes, sir.
So we are able to verify that. And as you said, our Sales Tax Oversight Committee, which has been watching us like a hawk on the street repair override, has given us A+ as far as reporting and actually following through and using the tax money generated under the current road tax explicitly for road and street repairs, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we've got a good report card, and we have a really, it sounds confusing, but we have a pretty clear and simple process for accounting for the income and then accounting for the expenditures. A point that Councilman Strong brought up about the accountability of oversight committee members kind of sparked interest in me. Obviously, city council members and other electeds and people involved in the decision-making process under the law have to report our financial interests to guarantee to the public that we don't have conflicts of interest, or if we do, they are very obvious and we are able to avoid them. My understanding of what the city attorney said was likely this will not be required of oversight committees under state law. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so my follow-up question to that is, can we as a city require additional financial reporting to make sure there is no conflict? Can we say, if you want to be on the oversight committee, we're going to have to have a Form 700 from you?
We can. There are certain limits on the disclosure requirements that we usually put in place so that they're not necessarily having to report every interest that they have if it's not there's not a nexus to the position that they're providing. But there are certain times that advisory commissions are a city will add them to their conflict of interest code.
Okay, I only ask that because again and again, I'm told what a level of mistrust there is with local government. As those of us who have been elected understand is when you're running for election, you're part of the solution. When you're elected, you're part of the problem. So what people who may be involved in oversight committees may not realize is when they become a part of that oversight committee, they become kind of suspect also. So when we're talking about a prospective $10 million a year in additional revenue from an additional sales tax measure, I just wanted to make sure that we were on solid ground when it came to making sure we had the maximum amount of transparency and accountability there. Okay, I'm going to go around one more time for council questions, and we'll go to public comment. Councilman Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I've got to wait. I think public comment next, but I think what we should be doing is taking this in chunks, and once it comes back to us to kind of deliberate on each part of this, so many facets of what they want from us tonight. So
right.
I think we're going to get lost if we start the place. So yep. I'll hold for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Strong.
Well, yes, Mr. Mayor, actually following up again on the same topic that you and I were both on the transparency issue. These committees, if we give them the oversight and priority also into the budget process, they're not going to have the ability to make votes and recommendations and say, if you don't fix this specific road or do this particular treatment in this particular area, we can't approve this. Is that true? They will not have that amount of detail in their responsibilities.
So, Councilmember Strong, that is totally up to the council how much authority it wants to give to the committee. As the mayor and you have indicated, the more authority you give to the committee, the more requirements are on them for transparency and accountability. But it's a matter of degrees in terms of both oversight and in terms of accountability, how much authority you want to give the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Garcia?
No, sir. No new questions.
Thank you. And Mr. Gregory?
I just have one more quick question for Christopher on the staffing for the extra 2 people. So that seems like it'd make a significant gain on the road repair by having our own staff, so we have them full time. Do you have any kind of gauge of how much that'll benefit us?
It's going to be a huge benefit, Mr. Gregory. Currently, we're only running, for the most part, 1 crew just because of the staffing needs. Having these additional 2 people, especially for the lighter maintenance activities like crack sealing and pothole repair, we can be doing both of those activities at the same time. So we can almost double our output on certain activities. Pretty much anything other than the heavy repairs that require a full crew, like any kind of paving work or dig out repairs. So it'll greatly enhance our ability to do the routine maintenance around town, including sidewalks.
All right, thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you. That'll conclude council questions of staff regarding the issues in front of us. We go now to public comment on this issue. If there is one waiting to comment, the comment time is 3 minutes. We ask you to state your name so everyone in the meeting and listening in knows who's speaking. And I will ask staff now if we have anyone waiting in queue who would like to make public comment.
Yes, our first caller is Dee Lacey.
Very good. Welcome, Dee.
Thank you. My name is Dee Lacey. I was the chair for a committee that supported and campaigned for Measure J20. In that role, I had an opportunity to engage with a multitude of community members, some supportive of the measure and many who were not. In the course of the campaign, it became apparent there is a general lack of community trust in our city government. The success of future revenue growth opportunities for the city will hinge on how well the city lives up to the political commitments made in your Measure J20 ballot language and Resolution 20-118. I wrote you a long letter offering recommendations on next steps for Measure J20 based on feedback I received from community members, supporters, detractors, and campaign donors during the election season. Most of the recommendations pertain to the formation and function of an oversight committee. The city clerk has provided you with that letter, so I won't read it in entirety, but I would summarize by saying I believe it's imperative that the council considers seriously and with caution how to move forward regarding Measure J20. I don't think it's wise to begin spending incrementally. Look at long-range budgeting plans as presented to you by Chief Lewis and Chief Stornetta. Take the time to create a community-based oversight committee of engaged citizens. Provide the community with clarity and a complete view of Measure J20 revenue. It was a privilege to engage the community on the Measure J20 campaign. I found a community that wants to feel safe and enjoy a desired quality of life that they have pursued here in Paso Robles. I also found a community lacking in trust when it comes to the function of our local government. Their mistrust may not be based on factual information, but it is the perception. I hope you will take seriously what the voters have said and help rebuild their trust by being upfront, clear, and strategic with the revenue generated by their dollars spent in Paso Robles. I would also like to say one last thing. We have two of the finest chiefs in the country. Chief Lewis and Chief Stornetta are admired and trusted by the community and their fellow police officers and firefighters. Although I think this was a very difficult campaign in a very difficult election cycle, one of the highlights was working with the Paso Robles Firefighters Association and the Paso Robles Police Officers Association. I had the good fortune to work with Nate Bass, representing the firefighters, and Brett Mobley, representing the police officers. Their commitment to their profession, their fellow officers and firefighters, and this community went above and beyond. We are lucky to have them protecting us, and I'm proud that our voters supported them. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have someone else waiting?
No, sir, no other callers.
Very good. We'll close public comment, bring it back to the council. Dee did express that there are written comments that she submitted as part of the meeting tonight. And I would urge both the council and people in the community to read that letter. As people should know by now, all city council agendas and minutes and staff reports are posted on our city website at prcity.com, which gives you the opportunity to be as informed about these issues as we are prior to a meeting, and more able to make comments that are germane and effective. So I would certainly invite people to review that letter and all the other materials that are made available on our city website. So we'll bring it back now for the council discussion. I know we're going to have a lot of it. I think one council member made a good point. We should probably take, even though we roll these two issues together for public comment and discussion, I think it would probably be wise for us to take these issues one by one so we don't get ourselves tangled up too badly. The first issue in front of us would be the acceptance of a second SAFER grant to enable a third fire engine and station. Unless there are objections from the council, let's focus on that with our comments and our actions right now, and we will start off again with Councilman Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I definitely think that we should accept this grant. We've accepted the previous SAFER grant, and it's working very well. Again, if we don't accept these kind of grants, it's just going to go to some other city, and these are our tax dollars that our Roblins have paid to the state instead. So again, it's something that clearly I think it's in our best interest as a city to authorize the manager to proceed with. But again, this money, again, we need to make sure that it's utilized the best advantage. And I think, again, Jonathan would certainly have no problem doing that. Again, the other issue is that once these monies go away, then we still have to, worry about continuing on with keeping these firefighters employed. So I don't really have any other further questions. Again, a SAFER grant to me is certainly a good move for the city.
Thank you very much. Councilman Strong.
Yes, that's all very true. And the SAFER grants, there's a perception among some members in the community that every time we accept a grant, it increases our taxes. And that basically is not true. Every government level above us, especially state and federal, actually already has collected money, and they allocate in their budget certain amounts of it for these purposes. And it is going to be spent. Whether we take it or not, somebody is going to get that money, and it's not going to increase our taxes one dime. The only time that we have anything that affects our budget is if there is a matching involved. And even when there's a matching involved, it really only means that we get a project probably for about half the cost that it would be to our taxpayers if we didn't accept it. So it's always a plus, almost always anyway. And the requirements that are put on grants are not anything special other than that you use the money for the purpose that you applied it for, and that you do so in a legal manner. That's all. There aren't any other special requirements in any of these grants. And I think that's important. And this is a really good one that we can really use and need, and it's very timely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Garcia.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I also feel the same way, but as I learned this past year, the ISO rating is something that was of great concern to our community residents when they saw their insurance premiums going up. So I really feel that the chief is taking that into consideration, as also with our safety, of course. And I agree on the SAFER grant. Let's use it. It's our tax money. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Gregory.
I'm back. There you go. Sorry about that. Yeah, I concur with Councilman Hammond and Councilman Garcia. I think and Strong that these are funds that we should absolutely use and get started right away on bringing those folks on board. And I had a question of process for Tom Frucci or our city attorney. Do we do this one item at a time on approvals? So if we want to make a motion for this, do we make it independently of each of the other?
So several of the areas have resolutions. So I would think it's both for legal purposes as well as just ease of focus. It's best to go page by page, and I would start with just the recommendations here related to emergency services and the SAFER grant.
So those recommendations are A, B, C, and D. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So Mayor Martin, I'll wait for your comments, but I'm ready to make a motion.
Yes, and the only comments I would make is, and we as a council and a community have learned this time and time again in the past, while I agree with the comments made about grants by all of our council people tonight, grants do not live forever. And we've all experienced that. And I would like to somehow put a note in a bottle for future councils that if we're going to maintain the service levels that are established by these grants, then at the end of the 3-year period or whatever the grant period is, there's going to have to be a way to backfill that so those services can continue. It's not something that goes on forever. Back to you, Councilman Gregory.
Okay. Can you please put up the resolution for this item? I can't get it fast enough on my computer. Sorry.
Mr. Gregory, do you mean the exact resolution page itself?
Well, I can move that we approve the resolution, but will that include A, B, C, and D?
It does include A, B, and C. D is just general direction to us.
Okay. So I move we approve resolution 20XXX, authorizing the city manager to execute all documents necessary to accept the 2019 SAFER grant in the amount of $1,196,262 maximum.
Second.
Motion by Councilman Gregory, second by Councilman Hammond. Any further council discussion? Councilwoman Garcia?
No, sir.
Councilman Gregory?
Wait a second here. Sorry. No, sir.
Councilman, where did I start? Councilman Strong?
Yeah, quick question. Even with A, B, and C, what we're doing is just approving the acceptance of the grant, correct?
And the steps necessary to implement that. So C, for example, says
grant.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Any further council discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Gregory,
Mic is off, Steve.
Councilmember Gregory,
Lost my, there we go. Aye.
Councilmember Hammond,
Aye.
Councilmember Garcia,
Aye.
Councilmember Strong,
Aye.
and Mayor Martin.
Aye, measure passes 5-0. Moving on to Measure 20's likely passage. Next steps, we have recommendations, some authorizations, and a resolution. Let's start at the top again. Mr. Hammond?
I thought we were going to have D and C read out also.
D and C of the previous motion?
Well, there was three parts of what staff was asking us to vote on.
Okay, so you would like to have that read out just for clarification?
Well, yeah, Councilman Gregory read item A, and there's B and C, and then further D, just give a direction to staff, but I assume that we would take votes on.
Yeah, so my understanding is the resolution covers those actions, but I certainly appreciate the need for clarity. Could staff read out the other actions that were included in that resolution?
Yes, sir. Be glad to. So in addition to, in essence, telling the federal government we are accepting the grant, to implement that grant, we need to amend the authorized position listing in the budget to add the 3 fire captain positions that would be paid for by the grant, and those would be added to the fire suppression program. In addition, a further amendment to the budget would be to appropriate the funds from the grant that would be expended in this fiscal year. Obviously, we have only a 1-year budget this year, so it'd be to appropriate $340,000 of expenditures, $306,000 of which would be offset by the grant revenues, to add the 3 fire captain positions and the recruitment efforts, and then also to appropriate $650,000 from the Fire Development Impact Fee Fund. So that is money that's paid for by developers and development in the community to handle increased costs related to growth. So that doesn't come from existing residents. And that would pay for the fire engine and the temporary station costs. And then in addition, as general direction to staff, you would be directing us to proceed with the hiring, acquiring the engine, and building at least the temporary fire station. And of course, we'll be bringing back to you contracts related to those, but at least gets us going on those efforts.
So correct me if I'm wrong, all those actions were included in the one motion?
I'm not quite sure. We'd have to ask Mr. Gregory, sir.
Mr. Gregory, was that your intention?
Yeah, I did ask that, and that was my intention, but I'm happy to discuss
The second, Mr. Hammond, are you good with that?
Let's have it first and second to incorporate all 4 items of this.
Okay. Out of an abundance of caution, would you like to make that clarifying motion?
Sure. So I move to approve Resolution 20XX authorizing the city manager to execute all documents necessary to accept the 2019 SAFER grant and the amount of $1,196,262 maximum, and amend the authorized position listing to add 3 fire captain positions for the fire suppression program And item C, to appropriate $340,000, offset by $306,000 of the grant revenues from the general fund to add 3 fire captain positions and a related recruitment, and $650,000 from the Fire Development Impact Fee Fund for the apparatus and temporary station costs. And to direct staff with hiring personnel and meeting the apparatus and station requirements.
Move forward immediately. There you go. Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilman Gregory, second by Councilman Hammond. Any further council discussion?
No, sir.
Let's have a roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Gregory,
Aye.
Councilmember Hammond,
Aye.
Councilmember Garcia,
Aye.
Councilmember Strong,
Aye.
Mayor Martin.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you for that clarification. Always helpful. Okay, let's move on now to the J20 questions, and Councilman Hammond.
Yeah, I think, again, we take that in parts also, and I was thinking, again, with regard to the committee, the Oversight Committee, I think we need to get into the weeds on that one a little bit and how we as council feel like we should set that up and have, discussion about it a little bit.
Okay.
I clearly think, again, just to start that off, if that's okay, then
sure.
We need to expand it to 9. I think originally I also see that we should keep one oversight committee for both the road and this other money, J20 money. So basically N12 and J20 oversight. They would, I think, in my opinion, should run these separate meetings. They only meet now quarterly, and it'd be no issue to have them meet, every 6 weeks at this point. But they would take each, revenue generating proposal and report out and discuss, separately, which is, I think, what I've heard from community members. They want to see that the new monies are spent in an appropriate manner and not mixed into the old in 12. So that would be my first recommendation, is that we keep the same committee. And originally, remember when we started that committee back in the day, that we had so many members. I think we interviewed 28, I think it was, as I remember, and we ended up making 9. I think we're down to, 7, or how many do we have currently on that that still want to serve?
Christopher, do you remember the exact number?
I think it's 6.
Yeah, right. So I know it's whittled down. It gets to the point where people don't want to serve anymore. But I think if we bump it up to a minimum of 9, and I think that's going to be a good number to try to shoot for. I'd throw that out first for discussion, maybe, and then the makeup of that. We need to get into who we'd like to see, and maybe how we would appropriate personnel for that.
Okay. Let's get some other thoughts on that. Moving along, Councilman Strong.
Yes, I'm not sure 9 is going to be enough. If we've got 6 holdovers, that would only leave 3 positions. And I know that the Chamber would like a position. I know Main Street would like a position. I know that Wine Country Alliance wants a position. The Firefighters Association wants a position. The Police Union wants a position. That's 5 right there. That's 2 over the 9. That's up to 11 without any public members at all. So, yeah, we're going to have to really think this through as to, well, this may very well wind up being a 15-member committee if we have six holdovers, unless we split it and have one for N12 and the other for J20. And that's a possibility, too, and you keep your individual meetings separate and smaller and more manageable, and also gives more people the opportunity to participate so that you have even more transparency and more community involvement. So there's a couple of things to think about when you're making these kind of decisions. The other thing is, if you're going to combine them, then you almost have to think of it as a 1.5 cent sales tax, at least until 2025. And at that point, it depends upon whether the voters reauthorize the streets money and keeps it at that, or if all of a sudden we're down to each of the 3 primary units only getting 1/3 of a cent. rather than a half cent. and that's important. But if we separate them, or if we combine them, either way, right now, I think we almost have to think of it as a half-cent sales tax for fire, a half-cent for police, and a half-cent for streets. And especially because the J20 thing involved almost totally personnel. It also involved some equipment and a little bit of infrastructure. But that was very minor in that one, whereas in streets and roads, it's primarily infrastructure. And now also we're starting to include some personnel, which are necessary in order to do the infrastructure. So, and it's important to make that distinction that this is a legitimate expenditure for these two positions in public works. That is a legitimate expenditure under N12, because that is to serve street and road maintenance and repair, which is exactly what N12 is for. So if we can keep those particular things in mind as we proceed, then I think we have to think seriously about exactly how we want to structure either one or two committees. And those are my primary concerns in those particular areas. Definitely we want to move ahead, we want to do it right, and we want to have transparency, but let's do it right. And actually have the community involvement. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Garcia.
Yes, sir. My idea, I was thinking of doing two separate oversight meetings or committees. And then as far as the actual positions, you know, I don't know if we've even thought about this or not, but maybe getting someone from each of our districts. And only because each of our districts has different needs for public safety. I don't know if that's another thing that we can think about. If we could choose someone in our district to be on that committee. I hear a lot in my district. We have the Nextdoor app, and a lot of people in this area have concerns as far as public safety. And so I don't know if we can, if that would be one way to also think about it. But I would like to see two separate committees. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Gregory.
Yeah, I agree with everybody. I think keeping these committees separate is a good idea. Currently, I am the ad hoc advisor or ad hoc person on the half-cent supplemental, and I'd really like to be on the J20 and along with other council people if they so choose. But I like the idea of maybe having staff come back with a makeup. I like both what Maria said. I like what Fred said. I think the larger the group, the better. I really think it's important to have people that are very representative, the concerned citizens that want to make sure that every dollar is spent in the right place. There's several people that mentioned to me, including the Wine Alliance, Chamber of Commerce. So I think that I'd be willing to support some kind of a motion where the city staff would bring back that at a future meeting to talk about the makeup of the committee. But I really think it's important to have one or two of us on the council there just as an ad hoc, not to be part of the committee, but to be listening to what their issues and concerns are so we can report back to the council. Those are my comments.
Thank you. So for myself, I'm going to differ on a couple of points. First of all, I think there are two or three primary reasons for having this oversight committee discussion. First of all, when we went to the public with this, we used the same type of strategy we used when we went to the public for the road tax override, and that was there would be an oversight committee to make sure that the money that is collected from the special tax is spent for the roads. And we've all gone through the ins and outs. It's a general tax, it's a special tax, but we have accounting set up, which makes it very easy and very transparent to measure how much money is collected by a special tax and where it's spent. And the purpose of our oversight committee is to make sure that we perform on that that we are not somehow taking money and moving it from account to account and using it for reasons that people didn't want it used for when they made their vote. And a second reason for doing this is getting back to transparency. My problem with having two separate committees is, as Councilman Strong indicated, we already have one sales tax component, which is being reviewed and adjudicated and judged by an oversight committee. And then a part of J20 is also road maintenance. So it just becomes more confusing to go out to the public and say, yes, we have two committees. This committee looks at these dollars, this committee looks at these dollars, but all of those dollars together go to the same place. You have the potential for confusion, not only in the public, but between the committees themselves. So for that, I think one committee is preferable. I like the outline the staff has put in front of us tonight by offering to continuing membership of the existing committee members. Not all of them may want to continue, but at the same time, they may wish to, and I think that they should be incorporated into that. We need to expand the membership, allocating new positions. Of course, I think the major organizations need to be represented, but I also like the idea of having positions district by district. We've gone district by district with our elections. We knew that by going down this road, we were going to be addressing the needs of individual districts, where in the past we've addressed the needs of the city, citywide. So following that model, we need to have that type of input. And last but not least, when it comes to this amount of money and this amount of potential confusion, I think that it's important that we have a larger and not a smaller committee. I don't mean to cast aspersions on anyone, but the amount of mistrust out there gets shared by everyone. If we restrict this to the usual players, the Chamber, Main Street, Wine Country, Travel Paso, we still have thousands of people out there that may or may not trust that process, and I want to hear as many voices as possible. That being said, a couple of other points. If this is going to be the same type of committee that we've experienced in the past, where it is an oversight committee, they look at the revenue generated by the special tax, they look at the expenses and where the money is spent, and guarantee to the public that that is being done, because those expenditures are prioritized through a public process, through a budget process, then I'm happy with that. If we're going to expand the authority of a J20 committee to become an advisory committee over $10 million of new revenues, then I think it behooves us as a council to expect a little bit more accountability from that group for transparency and accountability as we move forward. So if we're going to have an advisory committee that has that level of input into the budget process as opposed to everyone else in the community, then I think everyone else in the community needs to know up close and personal who's participating in that committee. So those are my points. I generally like the oversight and advisory process outlined by the staff. I think that we need to have more committee members, not fewer committee members. I think we need one committee. And I think based on the amount of involvement of that committee in the budgeting process, there should be a greater level of scrutiny when it comes to who is on the committee. Last, I've got one more thought that occurred to me, and that is it was mentioned about the Police Officers Association, the Fire Association. And as they've been lauded earlier this evening, we've all praised these folks for the work they've done for the community. That is beyond question. I would not mind if we established this committee, if representing our police and fire department, if we had our police chief, who has been so instrumental in explaining to us and to the community the needs of his department, and the fire chief, who has done likewise, to be on that oversight committee. So those are my points, and that would be the type of structure and the type of authority and the type of review that I would support. That being said, top of the list, Mr. Hammond.
Again, I think it was staff's thought, maybe, again, keeping one committee. I think, again, kind of with you, Steve, on this one, because the more people you get on a committee, sometimes I think it's harder to get things done. People don't show up if we don't have a quorum, or, there's a lot of issues when the larger the committee. However, it's a public meeting, and anybody can attend and essentially speak and be part of that discussion at any meeting. I just wanted to make sure whatever we do functions properly and moves forward. And again, if we're still going to meet quarterly like they currently do, I would think that's probably sufficient. And then again, they at this point every 3 months, they're going to have it every 1.5 months. That would be my thought, again, just to keep it with one committee. I would like to be interested in knowing who is on there and what's their term of completion. And there's 6 currently from what Christopher says. So we might want to look at that again to redevelop the whole committee as one unit. Again, maybe expanding it. I think we should keep 11, an odd number, 11 or 13 if we're going to do that. But I think I caution again, the more people you have on it, they might not make a quorum, work might not get done, and that's what I'm concerned about.
Gotcha. Mr. Strong.
Well, I'm not quite as concerned about keeping the number too low, because I serve on some committees with as many as 55 people, and we always have a quorum. So that's at the state level. And they try to draw 55 people in from all over the state for meetings. But we get a quorum, and usually much more than just a basic quorum. So as long as it's important to those people, they should be attending. I can see value in the one committee, in that if the one committee then looks at it as 1.5 cents, and they're trying to be a little bit equal between the 3, because we already have N12, which is specifically for streets, and then we split it equally. That's a third, a third, and a third. That's 0.5 cents each to work with. Whereas if we have 2 committees, then we have one that's just dealing with streets for 0.5 cents. We have the other one dealing with 3 things, which would then wind up giving streets and roads 2/3 of the total money coming in, or more than 2/3. Because if they got 1/3 of the 1 cent, plus they got a full 0.5 cent, now they're getting much more than the other 2 combined. So that's not necessarily good. Okay, and but I'm conflicted in that. But don't make this too small. Don't be so worried about the size of the committee. And I think getting the quorum there has to do with the interest level and the importance of the topic. And you've got 3 very important topics here. And as long as we're on the streets, and I know Mr. Hammond made the big plea for, gee, this is going to be great for the west side. I'd like to remind you that even in District 4, over on the southeast side, we have a collector street and a number of city streets that predate World War II. And the collector has never been rehabbed, and now getting close to 100 years. So I think it's actually scheduled for next year, finally, after all this time. So it's not just the west side that's been neglected through the years. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Garcia.
Yes, sir. After listening, I do see your point on the one committee. So I'm okay with that. But I see Mr. Hammond's point also. We need to know who is still interested from the 6 on the current committee, and need to know when they will, drop as well. So we need more information, of course. Thank you.
Okay, Councilman Gregory.
Yeah, I'm okay with this single committee as well. So something that everybody should know, and the public, is that the funding for the 0.5 cent sales tax has pretty well been scheduled out all the way to 2024. So a lot of their meetings are a review of that and a revisitation, and sometimes the staff has to move repairs around by, like for Union Road, for example, that got moved up and something else got moved back. But for the most part, the portion of the 0.5 cent sales tax is pretty well planned out, but it still needs to be reviewed and managed. So I don't see a lot of work for that part of it. I think it's really important that if we do one committee, that we keep the individual measures completely separate, so there is no confusion. So I don't want to use the words 1/3 this, 1/3 that, 1/3 that. I think we need to say the 0.5 cent supplemental tax for roads. That's the meeting. Here's the information. Now we'll move on to J20. Here's the funding being presented, how we're going to spend it. I think that's a very important issue. I do like the comment of having, and I'd have to refer to staff on this, but I like having both John Starnetta and Ty Lewis on that committee because of their knowledge of expense. And one of the most confusing, most difficult things in a budget process for future planning is for complete comprehension of what the money is being used for. And I think, with all due respect, I do respect having the individuals from the different police and fire associations, but I also see the value in having Chief Starnetta and Ty Lewis there because their interests are keenly management interests for their departments. So I'd be willing to support a larger committee. I too think it's 11, 13, 15, whatever it needs to be. But I think we need to have strong people who are interested in the community. I think districts would be okay. I think having people from the different groups are okay. And having people from the existing half-cent supplemental tax committee that want to participate. The level of involvement, I think, is going to be much more intense in Measure J, and should be, because it's going to be a little more complex, because that money is going to be primarily spent on police and fire in the beginning and eventually share it with roads as we go down the road. So I think that my recommendation is that the city staff bring back a very strong, can you hear me still?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
A strong direction as far as protocol and how we deal with everything on their budget and how it works. And it's going to be a little more involved because we have several different subjects going on. So it'll be a little more integrated, and we almost have to have like somebody like Ryan or somebody from Ryan's department there to help us with the discussion of that. And I'll repeat it again too. I do want to be liaison on this committee, and I'd encourage that maybe another council person join that. That's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you. I have a question. I think this goes to the city attorney. There was an issue brought up about reaching a quorum on this committee. I've been members of organizations and boards where the quorum was defined as the number who showed up, and that may sound strange, but I think the issue being that if it's important enough for you to be in on this process, then you will be there. And not achieving a quorum is not something, an arbitrary quorum is not something that should stop progress. Is there a legal requirement to set a number for the quorum?
There's not necessarily a legal requirement for a body like this that's established by the council. So that's something that can be set in the bylaws and how it is set up. I mean, typically It would be set up like the council, where it's a majority of the body has to be there to establish a quorum. So you have, if it's a 7-member body, you need to have 4 people, and then the vote is determined based on the majority of the quorum that's there. But yes, typically your quorum is the majority of the body.
Right. So I'm gonna lay out here the points that we seem to have at least some overlap on, and I would, in order to move this forward with a meaningful input for staff, I'd be entertaining a motion or making one myself. What I'm hearing is nobody's really fighting the idea of one committee versus 2. So one committee. I would suggest a membership number in that committee of no more than 17. That would include at least one representative from each political district that we now have set up in the community. It would include as liaison positions, not counting towards the 17, our police chief and our fire chief. And it would assume that this committee operates in an oversight fashion in the same way that our current sales tax oversight committee operates, but inviting them and certainly encouraging them and anyone else in the public to be involved in the budget process itself. But the committee itself, its legal assignment, its charge would be to be an oversight committee to make sure that the money is collected from J20, a like or greater amount is spent on the priorities that were enumerated under J20. Is there anyone that would like to make a motion to that effect, or potentially a similar motion?
So Steve, I'll take a shot at it.
Sure.
So this will be initial direction for setting up an oversight committee. So I want to discuss this just a little bit. So the liaison with the police chief, fire chief, and I think you need to include a city council person or two in that, because that's how important this is.
Steve,
go ahead.
Can I interject right there? I would say, as far as the police management, I mean, upper level management, and I would also, I think Christopher would be already there at that kind of a meeting, but essentially those are the three charges that the taxes was supposed to be, moving forward: police, fire, and roads. So yeah, I think, and obviously our chiefs, have lots of meetings, but what I'm looking for is upper level management that could advise the committee, and that's
okay. Let's let Steve. Let's let Steve finish his thought, and we'll go around the council again. Go ahead, Steve.
So the motion would sound like this, and everybody can chime in, and we can find it. So the liaison part of the committee would be police chief, fire chief, and our public works director or interim director, and at least one city council person, and up to 15 or 17 members of the public, one from each district, and consideration for the existing members that want to continue, including for Steve King, who is the director of that or the head of that committee, and then various other community groups such as Chamber, Travel Paso, Hispanic Business Association, whoever wants to participate in that. So that would be coming up.
I'll second that we have two councilmen as the liaisons. And I'd like to volunteer for that too.
Is the maker of the motion okay with that?
Yeah.
Very good. So council discussion on the motion. Mr. Hammond.
Again, I would say as far as not necessarily absolutely have to be, there are two fire chiefs and police chiefs, but again, upper level management of those departments that have full knowledge of the needs. And that's essentially what we're trying to say here, is that input is what's needed to the committee. It's what's currently needed. So yeah, that would be my only comment.
I can change the word into that to the police chief, fire chief, or replacement.
Or their representatives.
Their representative, right.
Yeah. Are you good with that, Fred?
Yes, fine.
Okay. Any other comments on the motion, John? Mr. Hammond?
No, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have.
Do you have more comments?
Oh, Steve, I was stepping on you, I believe. Go ahead.
No, I'm at you now. Do you have more comments on the motion?
Oh, no, I was saying I have no further comment, Mr. Mayor.
Very good. Thank you. And Mr. Strong?
Yes, no, I don't have many comments at all, except one of the reasons that I'm volunteering for this is I think all of you know that I'm very much involved in the grant money for roads and infrastructure, regionally, statewide, and nationally. So I have a very definite interest in this for many, many reasons. So yes, I would like to be one of those liaisons. Thank you.
Very good. Councilman Garcia, comments on the motion?
No, I like everything I hear.
Okay, thank you. And the only other comment I would make is the question of function. Councilman Gregory, do you want to make any inclusion in your motion as to the oversight function of the committee?
Sure. Well, I think it's in writing in several places already. But I think that, and I probably have to look for Tom for wording, but the Oversight Committee's mission and responsibility is to ensure the funds that are coming from the supplemental J20 sales tax and the half-cent supplemental sales tax are being spent according to the recommendation of the council being spent on police, fire, and roads. So something of that nature, but I want to make sure that's stated correctly.
Very good. Before we go to a roll call vote, I'm going to ask the city manager if he's got any question marks over his head about what we said here.
No, sir. My understanding is that all of your direction in this motion would be incorporated in revised bylaws and charter to be brought back to you for your formal approval.
Correct. Any further council discussion on the motion?
So Steve, one more question.
Yes.
The motion. So the mission of the committee should be clarified by staff, and that comes back to us for a second reading. Or do we need to know that beforehand?
Yes, sir. We'll bring that back to you as part of the charter for the revised committee.
Okay. That's it for me.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Gregory?
Aye.
Councilmember Strong?
Aye.
Councilmember Garcia?
Aye.
Councilmember Hammond?
Aye.
Mayor Martin?
Aye.
Aye. I think I heard 5 ayes there. Motion passes 5-0. Okay, we've gone through the initial direction on general approaches for the Oversight Committee. Allocation of J20 funds, confirming priorities established by the resolution to address critical fire, police, and street needs. Do we have anything to cover there, Mr. City Manager?
No, sir. You see on your screen the request from the police chief, and then the next screen, recommendation page 3, has the recommendation from the public works director. So we would ask for your approval and direction on both of those pages.
Okay, let's work on the police portion of it then, starting with Councilman Hammond.
Essentially, what Ty's asking is to go ahead and start recruitment. Maybe question to Ty. What is your time frame? I mean, it's always hard to find good help, I guess, bottom line, but what's your expectation at this point, once you open up recruitment, that you'll be able to fill the seats that you need?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think it's important. I think that what I want to get across with this request is that we don't put a cap immediately on what the police department can hire. We have dozens of applications in queue right now for entry-level, academy grad, and also we're evaluating for lateral police officers. If we find worthy candidates that bring us above our currently authorized staffing as established in our current budget, we're going to come to council and ask for approval to hire those bodies even before the 21-22 budget is set. So again, I'm really trying to encourage the council to consider, getting us to that public safety element ratio within the general plan of 1.4 to 1.6. That's my goal. And I know that Mr. Cornell and others might not think that we're going to be able to achieve those 7+ police officers per year, but I believe we can. And I'm hoping that the council will support my optimism. And when I bring requests to the council to expand the department, that they're approved.
Well, I think it was the public that voted for this. And I agree that if we can fill the seats, that's what I'd like to see too. And currently, I don't have a problem with your thought here, because we can always borrow from the general fund currently and pay it back once the J20 funds begin to arrive, which again sounds like summertime now. I always thought, though, it was like a quarter behind once it goes into effect. I know the state takes a while. At any rate, I think that would be equitable, in my opinion, that, if you find the good people that you need, let's get them on board, and then we can find the money to pay back to general fund when that happens. That's all I had, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Chief, did you have something else you want to add?
I just wanted to reiterate to council also that we will be bringing a request in a nearby city council meeting to expand the dispatch center immediately. We've been trying ever since our active shooter to make sure that we have 2 full-time dispatchers on duty. We're also in need of a supervisor, and you can expect that that's one of the first requests that we'll be bringing to council in the very near future.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Councilman Strong.
Yes, if it's questions only, I'd like to ask Christopher because he said that these two positions are going to almost double his capability to do maintenance and repair, especially minor. With that understood, could we not take this? I don't want to see this come out of the J20 funds, at least initially in the first year or two. I want that money to go exclusively for police and fire, who are so far behind. And I'll keep fighting for more money for him in every way I can, from region, state, and federal. But I don't want to see these positions funded out of J20. I would like to see them funded out of N12 or out of just the general fund without being allocated to J20. Because I think we need to really commit that J20 money to police and fire at this point in time. And those are my comments. Or my question, I guess, to Christopher, isn't that possible? Couldn't that be done?
That is, yeah, and I apologize to the council. We've already had public comment on this because we rolled public comment together on items 2 and 3. So Fred, if you have comments you want to make now, please go ahead.
Well, I guess it's a combination question and comment then. Does Christopher have any real objection to that? Do we have to take it out of the J20 money, or couldn't we take it out of N12 combined with maybe just the general fund outside of J20?
Well, we had an alarm here at the treatment plant, so Christopher's out trying to figure it out. So the N12 funds are fully funded based on your 6-year plan. So if we start messing up with our adopted 6-year plan and start using that money for personnel, that's going to affect the 6-year plan. Plus, also remember when the N12 was passed, we made a commitment to the community that the money would solely be used to fix streets and not be used for personnel for salary.
Now, wait a minute. Did we say it wouldn't be used for any personnel? What about the personnel to fix the streets? Do they want us to fix the streets without any people doing it?
Yeah, but the personnel we have now, that's streets and maintenance operations budget, not N12.
I understand that's how we're doing it now. I'm saying in that case, then, could we not just take this out of general fund budget? I just don't want to, I won't approve this under J20.
Well,
I will not approve this under J20 this year or next year. In the third year, I might, but that's going to slow down the hiring of those people.
So, Mr. Strong, my recommendation to the council would be that if you believe these positions can increase the productivity we need, especially before the winter season, that you go ahead and approve these positions. And during the budget process, we can give you options. One option could be J20 refunds the general fund for this. Another option is that N12 money repays the general fund. And the third option would be that the general fund provides the full cost of these positions. So I don't think that decision has to be made tonight because, as has already been mentioned, the J20 funds.
Okay, so the only decision we're making tonight then is to approve these positions, not necessarily where the funding for them will come from.
Well, you are making a decision. You're directing us to come back to you with options like that for your future decision. Yes, sir.
Okay, that's fine. I can go for that then. But I'm fine with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Garcia.
No, sir. No questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory.
Just for clarification, we're just discussing about the police department, correct? Currently.
That would be my recommendation, and I concur with the police chief 100%. If we have ongoing and open continuous recruitments right now, and if we get a large number of highly qualified applicants that the chief wants to hire, we will immediately come back to the council with a recommendation on that. This is by no means an intent to limit police staffing. It's just to recognize the reality and give the budget process next spring a chance to really fully function.
So I was just making that clear so that Mr. Strong's comments were not about police or just about what he's talking about, but we're not considering that at this time. So I would agree with the chief on this and John Hammond. I think it's the purview of the police chief to hire at will and get us up to staff as quickly and as earnestly and as efficiently as possible. So I'd be fully supportive of that. And I'm ready to make a motion on this when you're done, Steve.
I'm ready to receive a motion. Thank you.
Okay, I move that we authorize the Police Department and Human Resources to maintain an open, continuous recruitment for entry-level and lateral police officers, as well as needed support staff without limitation. And to the city manager to return to the city council with request for high priority upgrades for police services as needed as part of the financial year 21-22 budget process.
Second.
Motion by Councilman Gregory, second by Councilman Strong. Council comment on the motion, Mr. Hammond.
Comment ready.
You're good to go?
Good to go. Thank you.
Okay. Discussion, Councilwoman Garcia?
No, sir. Good to go.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Gregory?
Aye.
Councilmember Strong?
Aye.
Councilmember Garcia?
Aye.
Councilmember Hammond?
Aye.
Mayor Martin?
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Next page, streets. Councilman Hammond.
So this is where I kind of started pontificating a little bit on the west side. Again, I really believe, again, that we need to devote as much as we can more toward the west side. And again, I'm not asking for complete reconstruction of streets, but we need to do some maintenance over here. And again, I'd like to work with staff and Christopher and Ditas, but again, I've always been, I think you've heard me over the years that I always kind of wanted to do the side streets, the streets that, the public uses every day and sits out in front of their home and they see it deteriorating so much, especially again on the old side of town, which is the west. Again, that is what I'm hoping we can redo. And again, I'm not taking away from safety at all, but if they don't need the money in the beginning, or that we can ramp the, kind of supplement a little bit N12 funds from the J20. I mean, clearly people voted for police, fire, and streets in J20. So there should be some part of that devoted, to the maintenance added and enhanced to what we're currently doing already. So, working with more labor, more help in the maintenance department, certainly we'll do that. But I think what I'm really trying to say is most of this kind of work that I'm speaking of isn't done by our staff. It's done by contractors. And the more we can get out there to have bid, the better the price is going to be. And I think that's something I'd like to try to tell staff to kind of research a little bit. And again, I know we can't do everything. We can't afford everything we'd like to see. But again, I really want to make sure that people understand that we want to kind of start looking toward the west side a little bit. I know we've done a lot of others, but that would be my 2 cents. If again, the maintenance specialist that we're talking about here is something that we can bring on with those funds, I would certainly vote for it. No question. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Strong.
As I indicated, I'll vote for those things if they come out of the general fund and or out of N12. But I can understand the N12 argument. However, a lot of the maintenance, it was indicated. I know Ditas didn't make the recommendation. I'm assuming Ditas was here, though, when Christopher said that will about double their capacity to do that kind of maintenance. And that's the bulk of the kind of maintenance I think that we need on a lot of those streets, the older streets. And especially, and all the older streets are not only on the west side. When we started paving and creating fully paved streets, was not way back in the 18th century or even the 19th century very much, early 19th century anyway. But we had not only the pre-World War II developments on the east side that were probably out in the county at that point, but we also have the golf course area, which was created about mid-century, a little past mid-century, and that goes back quite a ways and was not built to our standards and needs that kind of road, those kind of roads too. So there's a lot of stuff that's needed, but the west side definitely needs it, and I don't argue against that at all. However, I want to be careful where we fund these positions from. That's all. I'm not opposed to having the positions, but I still want to see the J20 money initially, primarily, I mean, almost 100% go to police and fire, because they are so far down that they have to come up. They're very, very important. Every bit as important as roads, and probably more important right at this point in time. And also, everybody's tax bills or insurance bills are going to get reduced if we do the right things with fire. So that's another really important thing from our point of view of our citizens. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Garcia.
I really like this resolution. We've been talking over and over about preventative care for our streets. If this is going to help that and not have to redo the whole street and hire more staff to do that and patchwork and fix it as we go, I'm all for that, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory.
Yeah, I would like to point out a few things. We cannot use the funds for N12 for staff, but we could use the amount of money we're talking about for this resolution is less than 2% of all of the funds that are still available to you. Police and fire still have over 98% of the funding. So this is a very little amount of money. But what we gain from this, being on that committee, is the maintenance and the crack sealing and all that really helps us keep up our whatever it is called RPI for the streets. And I think it's money very well spent, and I think we should support this as part of the J20 funds, since those funds are for staffing, and police and fire are majorly represented, and this is less than 2% just for the staffing on the streets. And I'm ready to make a motion.
Thank you. I'd just like to comment that I support the resolution with the caveat that Councilman Strong indicated, whereas we don't specifically point to J20 funds as being the source of funds for this, but as one of the possible sources of funds. And then to Councilman Hammond's comment regarding about the need to revisit West Side streets, as I understand it, our policies have been predicated upon the pavement condition index. And I think the discussion of reprioritizing streets would probably require us to have an agenda item to at least modify that policy of relying on PCI. In other words, if we find that there are additional prerequisites to prioritizing streets in addition to PCI, then that would allow us to go ahead and have that flexibility. Mr. Gregory, you had a motion.
Before I make my motion, I'd like to ask DETAS to send the next 4-year plan for the roads from N12 funds to the council so they can see what roads are coming up to be repaired, enhanced. That'd be really helpful. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and make the motion to approve Resolution 20XXX, amending the authorized position listing to add 2 maintenance specialists, 1 and 2 positions to the Streets Division, of appropriating $90,000 for fiscal year 2020 and 2021 to be repaid from J20 funds as received.
Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Councilman Gregory, second by Councilwoman Garcia. Council discussion, Mr. Hammond?
No, Mr. Mayor, we're good to go.
Thank you. Mr. Strong?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to have him take just the words funds to come out of J20 out of there, so that the funding source can be discussed at the budget.
Mr. Gregory, are you okay with that?
No, sir.
Okay. Any further discussion, Mr. Strong?
No, I'll just have to vote no. That's all. Thank you.
Very good. Any further council discussion on the motion? Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Gregory?
Aye.
Councilmember Garcia?
Aye.
Councilmember Hammond?
Aye.
Councilmember Strong?
No.
Mayor Martin?
And I'm going to go along with Councilman Strong on the flexibility of funding sources. I totally support the resolution except for that, so I'm going to vote no. The motion passes 3-2. I have nothing else on our agenda for this evening. Mr. City Manager, do we have anything else to come before the council?
Mr. Mayor, only if you want to give us some direction tonight on the budget process, we have time. You don't have to give us that direction tonight. It's solely up to the council.
Okay, Council Druthers, Mr. Hammond?
No, I think we're good at this point. I don't have any.
Okay, Mr. Strong?
Further.
I'm kind of played out tonight after that last one.
Okay, Ms. Garcia?
No, sir, no comment.
Mr. Gregory?
Can we, so Tom, are you suggesting we talk this at the next council meeting maybe as an item?
It could be, or we can talk to you in 221s. There's a variety of ways we can get your direction on this.
So I'd recommend 221s.
Very good.
Mr. Hammond, how do you feel about that?
Again, yeah, Tom, if you can do it that way, it might be better. Yeah, I would suggest 221s.
Mr. Strong?
I'll go along with that.
Ms. Garcia?
I'm okay with that, sir.
Mr. City Manager, it sounds like we're going to 221 discussions on the budget process.
Thank you, sir.
Anything else for the council?
No, sir.
Upcoming events, City Council regular meeting Tuesday, November 17th, 6:30 p.m. With that, if there's no further business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
A motion by Councilman Gregory, second by Councilwoman Garcia. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all for your hard work. Have a pleasant evening.
Wow.